Once you see how it operates, you're going to see it everywhere. You're going to see that they do it everywhere, across all Western discourse, all anti-Muslim discourse. All of their arguments that get repeated in our own communities, in their think tank papers, in their newspaper columns, in their political speeches, in their social media threads. You see it all the time now. The toolkit is consistent. The moves are very recognizable. And once you learn to recognize the moves, then hopefully those moves lose their power over you. Okay, so what tactics have we talked about so far? What techniques in the examples that I've given? The imperialism example, the slavery example, the monarchy example, the example of the brother who was talking about the immigrants in Switzerland, the brother in Switzerland who was talking about immigrants in Europe. Okay, each one of these examples has several tactics that are being used at the same time. You know, it's never just one. It's a whole stack of tactics that they use. So you've got like the category collapse, which incorporates also false equivalence along with it. You've got the, everybody did it sort of dilution tactic. The, so you're saying you're perfect tactic, straw manning, and so forth. And there's the fake credential or the credibility signaler of having the one who's delivering the false narrative being a Muslim or being a so-called insider or what have you, when they're actually delivering a colonizer, Western supremacist dogma. They're actually advancing a colonizer anti-Muslim agenda, but they're a Muslim who's doing it. You really need to look out for that one. You need to look out for that one when others do it, and you have to make sure that you yourself don't do it. Because just because a Muslim operates on a Western epistemology, that does not make it Islamic epistemology, just because a Muslim is the one saying it. You understand? Getting a Muslim to say kafir things doesn't make those things Islamic. It doesn't make those things true. Like I say, just like the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood saying this, that, and the other. Or like that brother in Switzerland, like I say, using right-wing white nationalist talking points. So these are sort of stacks of tactics that they use all together in one narrative, or even in one misuse of one word, which carries with it a whole false narrative, like imperialism or slavery or what have you. Then there's another kind of a tactic. There's kind of like an ad hominem mudslinging type of a tactic, which is when you use a word that carries tremendous moral or immoral weight to it, and you attach that word to someone or to something. Again, like slavery, like imperialism. So when you use that word that is loaded, you transfer all the weight of that word onto whatever or whoever you're using that word to describe. And I mean, it's like magically transferred, because there's no evidence backing for the use of that word. But once the word gets used, the transfer has already happened. It's automatic. So if you now push for accuracy, if you push for precision, you look like you're defending or you're denying something that's immoral. You're trying to nitpick or what have you. That's what you'll be accused of, as a way of minimizing. Like I said, with the civil war in Sudan, which is a civil war. Atrocities, yes. Mass killings, yes. Death and destruction, yes. But that's not what genocide is. That's what civil war is. You understand me? So you see, on the one hand, you can accurately say that someone is minimizing by not calling Sudan a genocide, but that's only because calling it a genocide is inflating it beyond what it is. You understand me? And that's not the same thing as saying that what is happening in Sudan is not bad. It's not saying it's fine. It's not saying that innocent people are not being killed. You understand me? It's simply saying that genocide is not the correct term for what is happening, and it is important to use the correct terms. You don't always have to lie to be dishonest. Sometimes you can say things that are objectively true, that are factually true, but it's not the same thing as being honest. It's like it's true in the same way that saying that a poodle and a wolf are both canines. So the imprecision is dishonest, and it creates a dishonest version of reality. And that touches on another topic in Western discourse, another tactic, which is context removal. There's the removal of precision, there's the removal of specificity, there's the removal of all relevant distinctions between things, and then there's just the complete removal of all context. Because like I said before, there is a context that never gets mentioned, but you absolutely have to remove it or ignore it if you are a Westerner. And if you're a Westerner and you want to judge and you want to moralize and you want to criticize anyone else, and that is the context of your centuries of unparalleled moral atrocities that have never been accounted for. That context is always overlooked. The fact that you have never been held to account for any of that, that you've never had to atone for any of that, you've never had to repent, you've never had to make it right, You've never even had to acknowledge it. You've never had to own up to what you've done. You've never had to make amends. You've never had to compensate your victims. And because of that, because you've never had to do any of that, you think that you can act like you never even did any of those crimes, and that you're actually in a position to sit in judgment over others. As if you're qualified, as if you are eligible, right? As if you have any moral authority whatsoever. Just because you have enjoyed impunity, you have enjoyed unaccountability. And like I say, for you, in your head, you think that's the same thing as being innocent. You think it's the same thing as being morally impeccable because you've never been convicted. Obviously, this is completely grotesque. Obviously, you're the last nation in the world. You're the last nation on earth that's in any kind of a position to moralize or sermonize or preach or judge over anyone. So that's the first context that just stays removed from your discourse. That just completely stays out of your discourse. That's the first context that always gets ignored. Because the moment you put that context into your discourse, then your discourse, anything and everything that you say, will be completely submerged and drowned by that context, and no one can ever hear you. You understand me? Because the context of your actual history, the actual history, renders you mute in any moral discussion. And in fact, like I say, every discussion that you do have is in fact precisely intended to obscure that context. You need it to be ignored. You need it to be overlooked. And when you're allowed to get away with that, when you're allowed to get away with overlooking that and ignoring that, it's a form of self-validation for you, like I said last time. It also allows you to cosplay as a moral actor, as a moral judge, as someone who even has morals, who even has values that are capable of being offended by the immoral actions of others. No, obviously this is not true at all. This isn't true at all about you, about the West. Your crimes so vastly surpass everyone else that it is not credible, it is not believable at all that you're even capable of feeling offended by anyone else's crimes. You do not have a sensitive conscience whatsoever. So anytime you want to talk about or you want to criticize someone else, some other nation, some other people, some other civilization, whether it's now or in the past, it is always by nature deflection. It's a deception, innately, quintessentially. Because when you act like you are in a position, when you act like you're in a position to criticize anyone or judge anyone, you are implying that you are not only not worse than them, but that you're actually better than them morally, which is a fallacy. And that's the real reason for your criticism. It's not about morality. It's about self-validation and invalidation of others. That's what it's always about. That's what it is always about. So that's the first sort of overriding context that always gets removed. And then, of course, in any given situation, any individual situation, any critique or criticism that you want to make, you will inevitably remove the historical context. You will inevitably remove the geopolitical context, the economic context, the cultural context, and so forth. When you're trying to explain or understand any topic, you remove anything that will actually allow someone to understand it. I mean, the simplest sort of manifestation or version of this is when you will, for example, say that country A attacked country B. Country A attacked country B, and you'll never mention that country B has been attacking country A, right, persistently for years. You won't mention that part. That's the most obvious, simplest version of your context removal, like you always do with Palestine. But you do it all the time. You do it all the time. Like when for example, you say Venezuela is a failed economy. The government mismanaged or what have you, or Cuba, you say about Cuba. I mean, there's many other examples. Without you ever mentioning, you'll never mention your own economic aggression against Venezuela or against Cuba, and the sanctions and the embargo and the economic subversion and the destabilization and the sabotage, the assassinations, the coups and whatnot that you inflicted on those countries for decades. You don't mention that part. You just say they're failed countries, you know. Or another obvious one is when you talk about so-called black people in America, African Americans, people who are economically disadvantaged in America, and you'll say that it's because of their culture, not because of, like I said last time, systematic, relentless, meticulous exclusion from the economy and discrimination and community sabotage and persecution and state-sponsored domestic terrorism, mass incarceration, ethnic cleansing, state sponsorship of the crack epidemic, on and on. Literally, documented, methodical, deliberate, consciously and carefully engineered policies and strategies of absolutely racist, white supremacist, heartless, dehumanizing subjugation and sabotage of the African American community, of the African American population. You don't mention all of that. You just say they're down and out because their culture is bad. I mean, in case after case, you'll see this. If you actually take the time to investigate, if you actually take the time to look into it, in case after case, you will see that whatever they criticize and whatever they condemn and whatever they moralize about and whatever they sermonize about, whatever failing or shortcoming they're criticizing, they'll always treat it as if it occurs in a vacuum. They'll remove the context. And the context, 9 times out of 10, the context is that they engineered it. That's the missing context. The missing context is almost always that this failure or this negative circumstance or this negative condition or situation is something that they themselves brought about, something that they themselves actively engineered. Like the Middle East conflict, right? They always say the problems in the Middle East are just never ending. These people are just violent and whatnot. They'll never be able to get along. As if you did not deliberately, calculatedly destroy the cohesion and the stability and the peace in that region that lasted for over a millennium. As if you did not shove a hostile, brutal settler colony, a colonial project right in the middle of that region. Then you armed them to the teeth and you deliberately use them to destabilize and you deliberately use them to disrupt everyone around them. You don't mention any of that. You don't mention any of that. That's how you take the context out. And the context that you're taking out is a context that is specifically incriminating about you. Or, you know, this country is poor, that country is poor, right? They haven't developed, they're backwards and so forth. You know, they don't have any technology, they don't have any industry, what have you, right? We all know the context for every single one of those countries. We know the context. And you leave that context out because it's self-incriminating. Like I say, you colonized, you destroyed, you de-developed, you subjugated, you isolated, you engineered dependency, you sabotaged. Like now, everyone in America and Trump and so forth, the Republicans, they're all going after Haiti, for example, Haiti. Well, you have been ruthless and sadistic towards Haiti. You have been cruel and savage to Haiti for hundreds of years. Haiti isn't poor and Haiti isn't unstable by accident. It's not unstable by nature. It's by design, by your design, which you inflicted with vicious discipline and consistency and persistency decade after decade after decade. Our de-development has a context. And your development has a context. And you always treat both of these things like they occurred in a vacuum. Your development and our de-development. As if these two things, our de-development and your development, are not in fact causally interconnected. One caused the other. So yes, add that to their tactics. It's really an overriding element, the context removal. You know, stripping anything that they talk about of all context, because usually the context is incriminating. And that's why they remove it. Removing the context is required in order for their critique or their criticism to stand at all. In order for them to achieve any sort of self-validation, they have to remove the context. And another way that they'll do this, another way that they will rationalize or justify the removing of context, is by positioning it as, you know, the past is the past. That's one. That's another tactic. What happened, happened. And everyone has to do for themselves. Everyone has to cope. There's only today. There's only now. And another justification is by saying that if you are someone who insists on including the context, all you're actually trying to do is come up with excuses. You're just trying to come up with excuses. This is connected to another very prevalent tactic that they use, which is oversimplification. They rely on oversimplification a lot. And it's not just the oversimplification. The oversimplification comes with an embedded suspicion of complexity. You understand me? Like complexity is only ever brought up to muddy the waters. That's how they'll make you think. Or like I said, if you bring up the complexities that come with the context, then it means that you're just looking for excuses and rationalizations to justify the thing that they're criticizing. You know, they'll accuse you of trying to hide behind nuance and so forth. So it's oversimplification that comes with a sort of built-in mechanism for negating or nullifying any sort of complexity. And this is especially the case for Americans. If you are more simplistic, they think, if you're more simplistic, it means that you're more honest. It means you're getting down to the nitty-gritty, right? You're getting down to the bottom line. You're a straight shooter, no BS. And by BS here, BS refers to context. It refers to genuine complexity. It's literally the elevation of simple-mindedness to the status of wisdom and insight. I mean, this is almost just talking about the whole nature, not even tactics, not even techniques. We're talking about the whole nature, the whole character of Western discourse, and not even specifically tactics, because the entirety of their discourse is always nothing but the full array of those tactics all blended together. No context, simplistic, lack of precision, using morally loaded terms that will lead to implicit conclusions without any evidence when the audience hears those words, falsely equating one thing with another when they're actually extremely different if you do not oversimplify and you do not remove context. Lack of precision, lack of specificity, suspicion of precision, suspicion of specificity and complexity, and of course the presumed entitlement to judge and to criticize. And that entitlement depends on all of the above, everything that I've just said, because you need all context, you need all clarity to be removed. You need everything discussed in a vacuum, which is another very basic fundamental tactic, which is the insistence upon a particular framing of this issue or that issue. In fact, this isn't really a tactic. I guess it's a tactic, but it's an element. The framing element is a major, ever-present factor in their discourse. The framing has to ensure that all of the tactics that I've talked about can be deployed. You understand? The framing is what excludes the context. The framing is what allows you to portray complexity as obfuscation or rationalization. The framing is what makes simplicity look like being just frank and honest. The framing is what protects their claim, their entitlement to judge and to criticize, because it excludes their own endless criminal record, which, if included, would exclude you from being included in the discourse. You understand me? Like I said, the moment a Westerner speaks, the moment they speak about anything, about the Middle East, about Africa, about the global South, about Islam, about Muslims, or what have you, about China, it is inescapably, and it is unavoidably, and it is inevitably going to be dishonest. The starting point, from the outstart. You understand? The starting point, the motivation is dishonest. And everything that proceeds from that must also be dishonest. And that's why it always is dishonest. So yes, the framing, the context removal, those are fundamentals. And you'll see this every single time. You'll see it every single time. There is no instance whatsoever where this will not be the case in their discourse. And then another part of this, I don't know if you can call it a tactic. I mean, it is a tactic, I suppose. It is a tactic. But it's so completely intrinsic in the way that they approach discourse that it's like the framing, the insistence upon controlling the framing and the context removal. It's fundamental. I mean, the tactics that they employ will vary. The tactics will vary, the way that they will deploy them even over the course of a single discussion. But the framing and the context removal are fundamental. These are overriding features. And so is this thing I'm going to talk about now, which is the pretense of being rational and being objective. They will always portray themselves as being supremely rational people. And this is a trick. It's a trick, and it's a trap in many ways. Because, I mean, first off, it's a lie. It's not true on the face of it. I mean, from the outstart, it's a lie. They are not rational. They are not objective. They're not fair-minded people, period. Never mind moral. I mean, they will try to portray themselves as moral, yes. They'll try to portray themselves as moral actors, which is an insult to everyone's intelligence. But they will also try, maybe they'll prioritize presenting themselves as rational. And they think that presenting themselves as rational is maybe even more convincing or more credible than making any moral claims, because anyway, they think that morality itself is subjective. So they will rely on their supposed rationality and logic, which they consider to be, or which they have convinced the world to believe, means that they are unbiased and they are objective. That's what describing themselves as rational and logical is supposed to mean. But this doesn't mean objective. Logical doesn't mean objective. Rationality and logic are methodologies. They're methodologies. You can apply them within completely irrational and illogical and immoral premises. Understand? The KKK follows its own logic. The Nazis were logical, according to their monstrous premise. Colonization was logical and rational. Chattel slavery. I mean, you put your best academics in the West, in America, your best academics and scientists, You put them to work to explain why Africans should be eligible to be treated as livestock. You did that. You said that if they had a desire to be free, to escape, that was a mental illness. You said they were subhuman. Yes, you crafted all sorts of rational, logical, reasoned rationales for being inhuman and for being cruel and being sadistic to African people. You know, A equals B equals C and so on. You had a logical process working within your centuries of heinous behavior. Yes. It was logical and it was rational for the Nazis to determine that gas was more efficient than bullets. That was a rational decision. It's logical and rational for corporations to do what they do, according to their completely atrocious premises. You understand me? So yes, for example, once you set up the framing, once you set up the premise, you set up the framing, once you remove context, once you treat every situation as if it is occurring in a vacuum, this is your framing. You exclude your own culpability in a situation that you yourself aggressively engineered. You exclude that. You operate on the premise that nuance and complexity either don't exist or can't or are not to be trusted, and you accept that the same word can be used to mean two different things that are substantively not the same or even opposites, and you accept that you can assign unearned or undeserved moral weight to a situation or to a person or to a condition simply because a loaded term has been used to characterize it, to describe it, and you accept that oversimplification is the same as insight. Okay, that's your starting premise. That's your framing. Once you've established that premise and that framing, then you can fire up all of your logical and your rational processes, and you will reach the desired conclusions, the conclusions that your irrational, illogical biases and emotions desire. And you can call yourself being objective and call yourself being reasonable the whole time. But no intelligent person will take you seriously. It's like, are a poodle and a wolf both dogs? Yes or no? This is your premise. Let's be rational. Rationally speaking, logically speaking, a poodle and a wolf are both dogs. And if it's okay to leave a poodle in a room with a child, if that's okay, then it must be okay to also leave a wolf in a room with a child. So then you leave a wolf in a room with a child, and it's perfectly rational. It's a logical thing to do because the framing is dogs are safe with small children. Because the poodle precedent, right? It's safe to put a poodle in a room with a child. Therefore, it must be safe to put a wolf in a room with a child because logically, they're both dogs. No, you're not a serious person. This is word games. You're selectively rational. You're selectively logical. Only once you have contained the usage of those methods, the logical method, the rational method, within a framing that suits you. You understand me? No, your secular materialism is completely incoherent and intellectually inadequate. It's exactly what allows you to come up with all of those grotesque premises that you have come up with and still do, that can then be rationalized and applied and implemented with rational, logical efficiency, like genocides, like chattel slavery, like wage slavery, like colonization, like rape, pillage, and plunder. No, it's an inhuman approach to the world. It's an inhuman approach to thought. And yes, it is inherently irrational. It is inherently irrational and illogical and idiotic. But nobody has ever dared to tell you so. You understand? No one has ever risked pointing out to you that your whole worldview is dumb as a bag of hammers because they didn't want to get one of those hammers from that bag smashed against their head. You understand? The only reason that you have been allowed to actually go around in this world thinking that you are smart and you are rational and you are logical is because you have kept genuinely intelligent civilizations. You've been able to keep them quiet. You've been able to stifle them by menacing them and threatening them and literally decimating them whenever your lunatic supremacy gets challenged in any way whatsoever. But see, positioning yourself, portraying yourself as logical, as rational, this has also become a kind of atheist or secular covert tactic specifically against Muslims. I mean, it's against anyone religious, with anyone who has a religious belief, but I'm talking about our people. You know, it's supposed to put us on the back foot. It's supposed to put us on the back foot and on the defensive because we already know that they believe that faith itself is irrational and illogical. Therefore, we have to now prove ourselves. We have to prove ourselves to be as rational and as logical as they are. You see, it puts us in a situation where we have to, or where we are validating their claim about themselves, their claim about being rational. We're validating that, and we are indirectly validating their disregard for Islam as irrational, and their belief that we ourselves are irrational people. And it puts us in a position of seeking acceptance from them, even while we're in a dispute with them, in an argument with them. You understand? It's a very useful tactic. And we are susceptible to it. Astaghfirullah. Because of our own lingering psychological colonization. And especially if you're a Muslim who's living in the West. If you're living over there, you're very susceptible to it. Because you're likely an immigrant or a child of immigrants, which means that you are already over there navigating assimilation in every other area of your life and trying to navigate just existing over there. See, this tactic is the most effective against people who are caught between two epistemic worlds, like Muslims, people who are raised inside of a tradition that always understood rationality as inseparable from and not contradictory to revelation and moral seriousness and objective morality. But now they're operating inside of a discourse that has attached atheism and attached secularism to the definition of rational, as if it was self-evident, as if rationality and logic are metaphysics or something, not just a methodology, not just a way of thinking. You understand me? No, the West did not invent rational inquiry. The transmission of this understanding runs the other direction. It runs through Baghdad, through Cordoba, through Cairo, to the European universities that plagiarized it. That's the transmission direction. But the West successfully attached their brand name to the concept of rationality. And Muslims in the diaspora, raised inside of Western education systems, so-called, you absorb that association without even realizing it or examining it. So you by default think you give them that. You concede that to them, that they are rational, that they're logical, and so forth. You give them that. And you know that they don't think you are because you're religious. And that puts you, or you let that put yourself at a disadvantage when you talk to them. You understand me? You've already internalized a whole stack of untrue things. You've accepted their self-validation, and you've accepted your invalidation, and now you are operating squarely within their epistemology and their framing. It means you've already lost. You should exit the conversation. You've already lost. So now, aside from trying to argue your point, you're under an added and completely fraudulent pressure to try to prove to these people that you are actually a rational actor by their definition. Prove that you are objective by their definition. Prove that you are unbiased by their definition. Because after all, their critiques are all based on impartial logic, right? Their critiques are all based on reason and logic, right? They're not taking sides. They're unbiased. So now you have to prove that you are also not taking sides. You have to prove that you are just as objective as they are. And the fastest way to do that inside of a hostile discourse like that is to turn your scrutiny and your criticism against your own community rather than against the power structure that is forcing you to perform their version of objectivity, forcing their epistemology on you. They'll never be pleased with you until you follow their way. Allah told you already. Again, like that brother in Switzerland, the only way to gain credibility with them, once you have accepted all of this, once you've accepted their framing, is to go after your own, to prove that you're unbiased, attack the Muslims, attack your own people, admit that some of the Western criticisms are based, so that you can show them how clear-eyed you are, how rigorous you are, how objective you are. You have the intellectual courage to be unbiased like them. I'm not being tribal. We have to be honest about ourselves, about our own community. Real analysis doesn't pick sides. Everything isn't black and white. I'm willing to say all of the hard things, I'm willing to say the hard things about my own community. That shows that I'm objective. Meanwhile, all the hard things that you're brave enough to say just happen to completely align with the power structure that you're living under. That's how brave you are. You're brave enough to say all of the hard things that will just ingratiate you to the people who are persecuting you. You have the intellectual courage to parrot the opinions of those in power. You're objective enough, so-called objective enough, to become a mouthpiece for Western propaganda. This is what you tell yourself. Which, of course, makes it more effective and it makes it more dangerous than when it comes from a Westerner, when it comes from a non-Muslim, when it comes from the kuffar. Because it comes with the supposed credibility of an apparent insider critique. Like I said, it's the same with the Muslim Brotherhood, just like the Muslim Brotherhood. Or when you have Muslims who will parrot neocon, anti-Arab rhetoric, anti-Muslim rhetoric. And you buy the whole narrative about dictatorships and what have you that need to be toppled so that we can have democracy because you have accepted all of those Western frameworks and paradigms. So it presents as if it is a Muslim position, because you have a colonizer position being repeated out of the mouth of a Muslim, being repeated on Muslims' lips. See, this is how someone like Candace Owens, back in the day, this is how she first got picked up by the alt-right. Back, in the mid-2000s or what have you, by being an African-American woman parroting white racist denials of systemic racism. This is how she made her bones. I mean, I remember her original YouTube channel. A lot of people don't know. Her original YouTube channel was literally called Red Pill Black, Diary of a Coon. That's what it was called. So she was able to say all of the things that white racists say, but she had the apparent credibility of being a black woman while saying it. You understand? It's not just white nationalists now who are saying it. There's a black woman who's saying it too. That's how that works. That's how that works. So now you have a Muslim voice speaking right-wing, anti-Muslim talking points. So it must be true. It must have credibility. It's coming out of the mouth of a Muslim. See, that's what their version of rational and logical looks like. It means saying what they say against yourself, against us. No. They are not unbiased. They are not impartial. They are not objective. They are not rational. They are not logical. Why do you think it's so important to them to validate this about themselves and to have you validate it and have you believe it? Because it's a tactic. It's a tactic. No, they're not in any position whatsoever to offer any kind of objective, unbiased critique of anyone or anything. And they're certainly not in a position to offer any sort of a moral critique of anyone or anything. They're only in a position to confess, to apologize, to beg for forgiveness, to repent, to atone, and to make amends. That's the only position that they are in with regards to the rest of the planet. They're not in a position to say or do anything else, and they're not doing that, and they're not going to do that. And yes, it is irrational. It would be irrational, and it would be biased, and it would be subjective, and it would be a prejudice on our part in their favor for any of us to accept that, for any of us to agree to overlook that and let it slide. No, you would have to be irrational to the point of lunacy to believe that these are rational, logical, objective people. SubhanAllah, like with everything else. Like with everything else, the only evidence is their own declaration. And their own declaration is overturned by the evidence of their actions. I mean, look at subhanAllah, look at the scale and the severity of your crimes ever since you became so-called rational and so-called reasoning. Ever since then, look, at the time of the Enlightenment and post-Enlightenment in Europe, the West, post-Enlightenment, in your so-called age of reason, do you understand? You killed an estimated 500 million non-Westerners in that period of time. Talking about from roughly the 1700s until now. You understand me? You launched a campaign of horror across the planet the moment you became so-called rational. In the Americas, in Africa, in Asia, across the world, across the whole globe. If you took all of the death and all of the carnage that the West has ever caused from the dawn of Christianity until today, between 80% and 90% of that carnage was committed during and post the Enlightenment. You understand me? That's your secular materialism. That's your rational atheism. That's your age of reason. Nothing but exponential acceleration of monstrous savagery. A reign of terror across the globe for the last 400 years. No, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala save us from your rationality. See that brother who brought the Muslim immigrant crime, so-called, into the chat. He thought he was being intellectually honest, right? He thought that he was doing impartial analysis, being objective. Or anyway, that's what he was telling himself. That's what he was telling himself, even though he never even actually brought any statistics. He just referred to his alleged anecdotal, personal, individual observations. But he had that measured tone, that academic tone when he was talking. He's learned to mimic them. He learned to sound like them very well. He had that performative language of concern for the community, like we have to face our own problems. So he probably didn't even know. He probably didn't even realize. He wasn't even cognizant of the fact that he was being used or allowing himself to be used as a weapon against his own community. I mean, like I said, he didn't actually bring any data. He didn't bring any statistics. But frankly, even if he did bring statistics, all that does is add another set of tiresome tasks that we have to go through to dissect the deception. Because you're not going to easily find any statistics coming out of Europe about immigrants and about crime that are even honest. I mean, you can find statistics. You can find honest statistics, but not easily. And I already know that when I'm talking to that brother, I'm not dealing with a serious researcher. So any statistics that he would have brought into the conversation would have been whatever he could find easily. And those sorts of statistics are always, not sometimes, Those sorts of statistics are always propaganda devices, always. And you have to sift through all the trickery behind the data. Who collected the data? What was the methodology that they used? How is immigrant being defined in the data set, right? Are we talking about first generation, second generation, third generation, anyone at all who's from outside the country, even if they might be coming from Europe? Or are we only talking about African or Arab or so on, right? Are you comparing economically equivalent populations? Are you comparing immigrant communities that are concentrated in urban areas where there's poverty and what have you? Or are you comparing it with the general national population, which includes wealthy suburbs? Right? There's a lot of trickery that goes on. I mean, what drives crime? What is known, proven to drive crime structurally in any population, anywhere in the world, Europe or anywhere else? And does Muslim immigrant poverty in Europe, which is produced by specific and documented discriminatory policies in housing, in employment, and education, and so forth, does that map onto the same structural predictors of crime that drive crime in any poor population in anywhere in the world? On and on. This is what I'm saying. Even if you had brought data and statistics, it's just more dissection that you have to do. I mean, none of these questions get asked. The statistics and the data sets and what have you never get examined. The data is provided as is supposed to be accepted as neutral evidence to get you to a conclusion, right? That's just the rational costume, tactic, put on top of a purely emotional and ideological argument, which is exactly how they do. That's exactly what they do every time. No, I mean, obviously, any statistics, any data about crime and immigration being produced by a European state apparatus in a political environment that is anti-Muslim, that is anti-immigrant, where the sentiment of anti-Muslim and anti-immigrant sentiment is a primary driver in electoral politics. Now, they're never going to produce a neutral assessment of objective reality. It's always going to be a constructed document that is shaped by the interests and the assumptions of the people who constructed the document. You understand me? For what purpose? That doesn't mean that there's no useful information in it, but it just means that you have to interrogate the information before you accept it, and no one goes to that trouble. But the whole point of statistics in an argument is usually for the purpose of preempting any interrogation. And obviously now, when you get into that, you have to get into the weeds and dissect all the flaws in the statistics, and this gets you sidetracked. And then your interrogation of the statistics gets you portrayed as being desperately biased. Like I said, if you insist on precision, you insist on accuracy, then that is going to be characterized as you being irrational and subjective. That's how they do. That you're trying to muddy the waters by trying to be specific. That's how the rational costume works, by making the interrogation of the statistics seem like bias. So when you question the methodology of the data, how the data was collected, then you're accused of being in denial. If you ask about structural factors, you're accused of making excuses. If you're looking for context, if you demand the full picture, then you're accused of muddying the waters. Muddying the waters with the context and with real existing complexity that can actually explain the issue. See, the costume has a built-in defense against scrutiny. Scrutiny itself becomes evidence that you are biased, that you just can't face the facts. You understand? That's how they'll portray it. I'm telling you, they have developed a very complex system of dishonesty. Truly, this is their main technology. This is the West's main technology, and it is very advanced technology ahead of everyone else. And the defense against the rational costume that they wear the defense is very simple in principle, but it's very difficult in practice. You have to examine, you have to interrogate. It's very time-consuming. It's very tiresome. It's very fatiguing. You have to examine what the claims that are actually being made. You can tell me that you're being honest. You can tell me I'm just being honest, I'm just being objective, whatever. But I have to determine that for myself through interrogating what you brought. The claims that you brought. What's the claim? What's the evidence? How is the evidence produced? What does the evidence actually point to if we interrogate it, if I interrogate it? Right? Am I going to come to the same conclusion that you came from? Or the argument that you are making that supposedly draws from the evidence, is that actually supported by the evidence? You understand me? Or have you just used the rational sounding packaging to smuggle in a conclusion past me that the evidence itself would not sustain, but you didn't count on me interrogating the evidence? Like I said, it's straightforward in principle, but it's very, very burdensome in practice. It's very tiring. It's very time consuming. And there's almost no motivation to do it. There's no incentive to do it, because even if you go to the trouble to do it, you're still not going to win the case, because you're dealing with people who do not fundamentally care about what's true. This is what you have to understand. You're dealing with people who don't care about what's true. Liars cannot be convinced by the truth. You can't point the facts out to a liar and have him change his mind. No matter what you do, they're going to find a way. Like even like straw manning, right? Paraphrasing. Oh, so what you mean is, what you're saying is, this is another tactic they do when they don't want to engage with your argument. They have so many ways. They'll just, if they don't want to engage with your argument, they will misrepresent your argument, and then they will respond to the argument that they're making on your behalf. See, they're trying to force their framing onto your points to reset the epistemology in the interaction. You understand? No, they cannot engage honestly. The only thing that they're interested in is validating their own framing, validating their own premises, validating their own biases, validating their own epistemology. Please understand me. Western discourse has been so comprehensively dominated by one set of epistemological assumptions for so long, for as long as anyone can remember or is in recorded history, that even the so-called critical positions within that discourse still sit inside of this very narrow range. It's the narrative shelf that I've talked about. So in the West, you can be a so-called progressive, but you still accept, unexamined, you still accept the premise that, for example, Muslim societies are uniquely prone to extremism. Right? You can be a so-called liberal. You can be a so-called liberal and still treat Western liberal values as the universal standard by which all cultures are supposed to be measured, which is already illiberal. You can be a so-called anti-racist and still assume that criticism of Muslim beliefs and Muslim practices and Muslim governments based upon Western frameworks is all right and valid and legitimate. But see, like I said many times before, they never truly understood. They never truly understood or internalized or absorbed any of the intellectual principles or any of the moral principles or ethical principles that they copied from Islam. You understand? It's like they looked at a Muslim library and they saw all the books on the shelves. They saw all the titles of the books, but they never realized that there were words written on the pages inside of those books. They thought it was just the titles. So they went home and they built a bookshelf, and they printed a whole bunch of books with the titles on the spines, but empty pages inside. And then they put all those books on the shelf and they said, these are our values. This is our ethics. This is our morals. It's completely empty in terms of actual comprehension. They're completely empty in terms of actual comprehension. And they'll use that bookshelf with all the great, respectable, dignified, noble titles on them as proof of what their real basic, unchallenged, unquestioned belief is, which is that they are inherently always right, no matter what. So the window of acceptable thought in the West has already been established. It's from the Overton window is completely established, which is, if you put it very simply, the West is the best. That's their Overton window. The West is the best. And what's really insidious about this is that even people who think that they're pushing against that are very often still operating entirely within it. See, they're only having the arguments that they're permitted to have. They're questioning the things that they're permitted to question, and in the way that they're permitted to question it. You understand me? The foundation, the civilizational frame, the epistemological assumptions, the way the terms of the discourse are said, that's never questioned. That's never questioned at all. Because if you question it, then you step outside of the window entirely of acceptable discourse. And when you do that, you stop being taken seriously by the people who are inside the window of discourse. This is why the brother in the chat who was talking about Switzerland, he thought that he was introducing nuance when he said, we can't just say that the West is evil. So he thought he was being sophisticated. He thought he was being fair. But actually what he was doing was policing the boundaries of the window, the Overton window, the acceptable discourse. He was ensuring that the conversation must remain within the terms and the conditions that Western discourse sets for how Muslims are allowed to discuss themselves and to discuss the West and to discuss their relationship with the West. You understand me? You have to remain critical of your own community. You have to remain open to Western critiques of the Muslim community. You have to remain inside the frame that positions Western liberal values as the neutral standard. You have to accept that. That's the window. That's the Overton window. That's the acceptable discourse. And he was enforcing that from inside our own community. And the defense against this, the defense against the imposition of this framework, is the most difficult thing of all. That's the most difficult thing, because it requires you to question not just specific claims within an argument, but it requires you to question the framework in which the claims or the argument is being made. You understand? You have to do epistemological work. You have to ask, whose frame is this? Who set the terms? Who set the boundaries of this framework? Who decided what counts as evidence within this framework? Who decided what counts as reasonable? What counts as unreasonable? What counts as extreme? And who benefits from those decisions? You understand? Once you start asking those questions, once you start examining the frame rather than just questioning things operating within the frame, then you begin to see where the frame distorts your view of reality. Wallahi, it's tiring. It's very tiring. Look, understand, this isn't just about political disagreements. It's not just about this or that Muslim government, this or that Muslim country, or what have you. This is not even at its root about history. It's not about statistics and the mechanisms of imperialism or what have you. This is about what kind of witnesses we are. You understand me? What kind of witnesses we are as Muslims. Like I've talked about many, many times on this channel, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has called us to be witnesses over mankind. And our testimony, how we describe reality, what we say happened in the real world, and what we say is happening right now in the real world, that carries a moral weight to it that doesn't exist in the West's secular frameworks, materialist frameworks. We're not talking about people with opinions. We're talking about people who are held to account for the testimony that we give. We're held to account for every word, for every claim. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran is very severe about false witness, false testimony. That's listed as one of the most serious of sins. And it is listed as a serious sin in the context of bearing witness about worldly matters, dunya matters, not just religious matters. About the world, about what happened in the world, about what is happening currently in the world, about the nature of the reality and the character and the shape and the form of the reality that we inhabit today. You understand me? So when a Muslim gets up in public and says something like the Gulf monarchies are imperialists in Africa, without examining any of that, without examining the mechanisms of imperialism, without applying any sort of examination of the definition of those terms between what imperialism actually is and what they're describing, right? They're bearing false witness. Wallahi, you're bearing false witness. You're giving a false account of reality to people who will now form their own understanding and who will determine their own loyalties and their own attitudes and their own actions based upon your account and your testimony. You understand me? Now, you can bear false witness without technically lying. I want to be clear about this. I've said it before. Lying requires that you know the truth and you're saying otherwise. You understand? These people believe what they're saying. That's what makes it so dangerous. The sincerest false witness is someone who doesn't even know that they are testifying to a lie. They don't know that they're lying. Because you cannot give accurate testimony about a reality that you do not see clearly. You understand? So the first requirement of the witness isn't even courage. Though courage is required, but that's not the first requirement. The first requirement is sight. It's vision. It's understanding what you see. It's knowing what's actually there. Once you can see it, and seeing it in and of itself is a process, then comes the testimony part. First you see, then you testify. And yes, in the testifying part, there can require a degree of courage, although I'm not sure if that's the right word. Really, I think it's not about courage. It's more about deciding who you fear the most. Just being more discerning about your fear. In other words, fearing the last day more than you fear today. Fearing the last day more than you fear today or tomorrow or what have you. And fearing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala more than you fear the people. That's what it takes to testify honestly. That's what it takes to be an honest witness. You have to not only not fear the power structure, but you also have to not fear the people. You have to not fear the people. Because, you know, we have this phrase, speaking truth to power. And we always understand that in a very specific way, which means speaking truth to the rulers, speaking truth to the government, and so forth. Musa alayhi salam standing in the court of Fir'aun and so on. That's the template. But Nabi Musa alayhi salam, he also had to stand up and tell the truth to his own people too. He had to confront his own people too. He had to face backlash from his own people too. You understand me? That's also speaking truth to power. I mean, we talk about speaking truth to power, but sometimes that power that we need to speak truth to is popular opinion when that popular opinion is wrong. Because the most potent propaganda machine operating in the world today is not any government. It's not any government. It's not any state apparatus. It's not any intelligence service that has their disinformation budget and what have you. No, it's the people themselves. It's the people themselves. Social media. You understand? Social media gave misinformation the ability to spread worldwide and to solidify in people's minds with just stunning, breathtaking velocity. It's amazing. See, this is different from state propaganda in a very crucial way, because when a government spreads a false narrative, when the government lies, there is at least theoretically a mechanism of accountability. You can identify the source. You can fact check. You can challenge the institution. You can point to the named actor and demonstrate the lie. There's someone to hold responsible, technically. Plus, most people are already skeptical anyway about whatever the government says. Everyone is already skeptical about government narratives, generally speaking. But when the people themselves participate in spreading a false narrative, there's no mechanism of accountability. There's no institution that you can name, that you can challenge. There's no specific actor who's to blame. It's us, ourselves. It's just the crowd. And the crowd doesn't care about evidence the way that a person who's sitting across from you, who's sitting in front of you face to face, the way that they might care about evidence, or the way that they might be made to care about evidence. No, the crowd only responds to group sentiment and shared consensus, to identity, group identity, the emotional satisfaction of feeling certain about something that's reinforced by the agreement of others, right? It's fortified by popular approval. It responds to the social pressure of everyone around you believing the same thing, and the social cost that would be inflicted for anyone who questions it. See, you challenge wrong popular opinion in any online Muslim community space, you're going to face a community and you'll face accusations of being a sellout. I have. You're a defender of oppressors. That's what they call me. You're Uncle Tom for the Gulf states. That's what they call me. Or they'll say you're AI. That's what they call me. No, the social penalty for challenging popular misinformation is very often higher than the social penalty for challenging official lies. Because official lies are anyway usually transparently dishonest and almost reflectively people reject it. But you challenge the crowd's beliefs. Well, the crowd themselves feel attacked. It's an attack on their shared identity. It's an attack on their communal solidarity. And the crowd enforces their beliefs the same way that crowds always enforce their beliefs, through social pressure, through ostracism, like I say, through labeling any dissenter, any disagreement, anyone who disagrees as a traitor or as a fool. And this enforcement mechanism works. It works very well. Most people, most of the time, will not pay the social cost of saying the unpopular thing. That's a fact. They'll stay quiet. They'll agree with the crowd. Because the cost is real. The cost is real, and the benefit of doing it is very uncertain. It's very negligible. No one is spreading more falsehood today than the people themselves. That's a fact. Nobody, not in aggregate volume, not in reach, not with the speed that it moves through the internet. I mean, the state used to have to run propaganda operations. Now the state can the state can rely on the people to do it themselves for free, with conviction, with passion, with the deep sincerity of people who believe that they're fighting for the truth. You understand me? No, popular misinformation runs today on algorithms that create cohesion and that create consensus by means of spreading. It runs on the emotional satisfaction of sharing something that confirms what you already think. And then it builds communities. It's self-funding, it's self-replicating, it's self-defending, and when you challenge it, the crowd doesn't examine the challenge. The crowd experiences the challenge that you're making as an attack on them, which triggers the defense mechanism, which is more sharing, more certainty, more reinforcement of their belief. Social enforcement against the challenger, which just makes everyone dig their heels in even more. And this operates inside our communities just as it operates anywhere else. You understand? The brother who was in the chat, who talked about immigrants in Switzerland, he wasn't running a propaganda operation. He genuinely believed what he was saying. He genuinely believed what he was saying. And the brother who called Gulf states monarchies and imperialists, he was not some Islamist operative from the Muslim Brotherhood running a coordinated influencing campaign on Telegram, probably. He was just, he absorbed a narrative. He absorbed a narrative and he believed it. And he was sharing it with conviction. And then there are whole online communities that are going to reinforce that foolish narrative. You understand me? And then, of course, once a narrative gets traction, then social media content creators will just echo it even more, because that's the easiest way to get clicks and likes and shares and whatnot, engagement and ad revenue. So they'll say what they know the people want to say, want to hear. I mean, the propagandists who actually do exist, the ones who have actual government budgets and whatnot, they figured out a long time ago that the most effective propaganda is the propaganda that people spread themselves willingly, voluntarily. You don't need to convince anyone. You just have to convince a few. You have to convince just enough people that then they themselves will do all of the other convincing for you. They'll convince everyone else on your behalf, right? Just let the social dynamics of community and the social dynamics of social networks do the rest. The belief becomes communal, and then the communal belief becomes self-evident truth. And then it becomes part of communal identity. And then the identity becomes defended by everyone who holds it. You understand? On behalf of the narrative, without any further direction from anyone, from the propagandists, the original propagandists who planted the seed. That's how it works. This is the environment that we operate in. This is what we are up against when we try to correct these arguments in our community, among our own brothers and sisters. Which is why, yes, on Middle Nation, we block people and we remove people all the time, because there needs to be hygiene. There needs to be hygiene in our intellectual discourse, and we've let a lot of people go. We have to just let people go. You can't convince everyone. And this is all down to the fact that over generations, many of us have adopted Western epistemology, and that has shaped the way our brains work. That has shaped the way our brains work. And this is where the witness function becomes the most costly. It becomes the most costly, but it also becomes the most necessary. Listen, the prophets, alayhim salam, they didn't go to the crowds and tell the crowds what the crowds wanted to hear. No, every single one of them, every single prophet stood up against the popular understanding of their time and their place, without exception. They stood against the consensus. You understand me? They stood against the culturally embedded beliefs that the people had inherited and had defended with their social standing and their identity. Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, he stood up against a civilization, so-called, that had built their whole identity around the worship of idols. You understand? Against his own community's popular opinions and his own community's worldview and his own community's epistemology. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he stood up against the Quraysh, which was not a government in the modern sense, something even more difficult if you think about it. What he was standing up against, it was a whole social order, a kinship networks, communal identity that everyone in Mecca was embedded in, and which the message of Tawheed was inevitably going to overturn, all of that. No, the social cost of speaking the truth isn't new. The social cost of speaking the truth to popular belief, speaking the truth to popular wrong opinion, speaking the truth to the crowd, speaking the truth to the community, to the people who are not going to thank you for it, but are only going to be angry at you for it. That cost is as old as prophecy itself. And we as Muslims, we are the inheritors of the prophets. And that inheritance includes the witness function, the function to testify, to bear witness, to describe reality accurately, even when the accurate description is unwelcome, even when people hate you for saying it, even when it costs you in social standing, even when the community turns against you for it, even when they accuse you and they slander you for it. The power of popular false belief is still power, and it still has to have truth spoken to it. And speaking truth to it requires the same thing that speaking truth to any power requires, whether it's a government or a crowd. You understand? You have to be willing to stand up when everyone else is going to go along with the narrative. You have to be willing to say, no, this is not accurate. This is not true. When the crowd doesn't care about accuracy. When the crowd just wants their sentiments validated. You understand? No, at Middle Nation, we're not here to be popular. As I've said many times, we publish on Middle Nation for posterity, not for popularity. We are not here to tell people and tell the crowd what they already want to hear. We're not trying to perform Islamic identity for social approval. We are here to think clearly about what is actually true, what's actually happening, and say it clearly and let the consequences come as they may. Because on the last day, when we stand before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the one who knows every word that we said, every claim that we ever made. And any person who was ever given a false picture of reality by our testimony, we're not going to be able to say the crowd was saying it, so we went along. You understand me? We're not going to be able to say it was too socially costly to push back and to tell the truth. We won't be able to say that. We're not going to be able to defend ourselves by saying that we were too afraid of what the community would think. We thought that our likes and our shares and our clicks or what have you were going to go down. No, the witness is responsible for the testimony, not for what others believe, not if the testimony is going to be accepted by the people, not what the crowd demands. We are responsible for the testimony, for what we say about reality, for whether what we say about reality is true or not. That's it. It's for the record. It's not for the audience. We say it for the record. And the world, subhanAllah, the world needs witnesses right now, maybe more than ever. It does not need people. It doesn't need more people just regurgitating the crowd's talking points. It doesn't need more people parroting the narratives that never actually challenge anything whatsoever that the power structure taught people to believe. You understand me? Narratives, the whole point of which is to distort and obscure reality. The whole point is to insulate the West from accountability and culpability and blame through evasion, through subject changing, through derailing, through whataboutism, and on and on and on. All the tactics that I've mentioned. Now, listen to me. You're not going to get anywhere until you recognize and accept the fact that they are not, the Westerners, the non-Muslim Westerners are not and cannot be good faith actors. They cannot be good faith actors ultimately because they don't even know how to be good faith actors. I mean, look, be objective here. Actually objective, actually rational and objective. This is not normal behavior. 500 million non-Western deaths caused by Westerners in 400 years. With the death toll literally rising each century up to now. Understand? The deaths that they caused in the 18th century were more than the deaths that they caused in the 17th century. And the 19th century, the death toll was higher than the 18th century, and the death toll of the 20th century is the highest on record. 400 years of escalating carnage. You understand me? This is a certain kind of people. This is a certain kind of people, and you have to recognize this. It's a certain kind of people, and it's a certain kind of so-called civilization. And they don't acknowledge it. They're kind of people who do it and don't acknowledge it, and they don't want it to be acknowledged. You understand me? They not only don't want it to be acknowledged, they want to insist on being treated not only as if they never did all of that, they want to be treated like they're the opposite of the people who did all of that. They want to be treated like they are the pinnacle, right? They want to be treated like they're the pinnacle of virtue and goodness and humanity and so forth. Decency, civilization, advancement. This is how they want to be treated. So it's not just that you can't talk about what they actually did. You have to pretend that they did all kind of great things. Think about that. What kind of a people is this? What kind of a people is this? You have been objectively, you have been a force of unprecedented death and destruction in this world. But you insist on being treated as if you are a force of unparalleled brilliance, unparalleled refinement, unparalleled ethics and morality and rationality and so forth. No. Uncle Sam is a mass-murdering, satanic, cannibalistic, perverted serial killer. Yes, and he thinks that he's sitting on the judge's bench. Or he's acting as a prosecutor, accusing you and I, accusing the Muslims, accusing the global South, accusing Africa, accusing Asia, accusing Latin America, so-called. Well, this is insane. This is absolutely insane. No, they don't acknowledge it. They don't acknowledge what they've done. They don't confess to it. They certainly don't apologize for it. All they do is play word games. That's all they do. Why, they do everything that they can by hook or by crook to keep the truth from ever being articulated or acknowledged or recognized or identified. There's a certain kind of people, and it's not normal. It's not normal. And it's not normal for you to pretend that it is normal. And it's not normal for you to ever expect that you are not dealing with the kind of people that you absolutely know they are. To lie to yourself. You understand? No, this is the most violent, the most murderous, the most thieving, the most cold-hearted, the most devious, treacherous, lying, deceitful, bloodthirsty, so-called civilization in human history. But you act like they're just like you. And you act like if you treat them and you judge them based upon the irrefutable evidence of their own actions and their own behavior, that somehow that's you being unfair. No, I did a whole series about so-called white people, so-called white people, about Europeans and their ancestors and their descendants and their culture and how it all developed and what kind of a mentality they have and how living in that culture, growing up in that culture, whether you're so-called white or not, you inevitably do become like them in your psyche. You adopt their ways of thinking, their paradigms, their epistemology, just as confused and as chaotic and as arbitrary, just as dishonest, just as untethered to any kind of fixed moral standards. You'll become the same way. And I'm telling you, based on the evidence, this is a certain kind of people. And I'm not saying this so you hate them. Don't misconstrue what I'm saying. I'm not saying to hate these people. I'm saying to be honest about these people. Be honest to yourself about these people. Look, telling the truth about them is going to sound like hate, but it's not hate. It's just recognition of reality, acceptance of reality, and calibration of reality, calibrating how you deal with them based upon that reality. You understand me? Do not expect honesty. Do not expect sincerity. Do not expect that they're telling you the truth ever. Do not expect that they're being rational. Do not expect that they're being fair-minded. No. Expect them to be dishonest. Expect them to lie. Expect them to be disingenuous. You understand? Expect them to be manipulative and conniving. Expect them to be irrational. Expect them to be illogical. Expect them to be unreasonable. And expect them to not care at all about you. Expect them to not care at all about the truth, to not care at all about morality or justice or fairness. And do not ever expect them to deal with you in good faith. This is what I'm telling you. Know who you're dealing with. That's all I'm saying. Know who you're dealing with. Look, if I tell you that there are poisonous or venomous snakes in a jungle, I'm not telling you to hate the snakes. I'm not telling you to not go into the jungle. I'm telling you to be aware of what's in there and be aware of what you're dealing with. That's all. That's all. See, their deception, in fact, their deception, in order for it to be dangerous, their deception relies upon your own self-deception when you lie to yourself that you're dealing with people who are just like you. Because you're not. You're not. They are not like you. They're not like you, and they're not going to change, and you're not going to change them. I think 400 years is long enough to know. I think 400 years is long enough to know that they're not going to change. Because it's actually been much longer than 400 years anyway. Now, they're still, until now, holding up their same approach to the world as superior. The same approach to the world that has made them so monstrous. And every interaction that you have with them is about them trying to validate that same approach that has made them monstrous. So no, they've never been normal. They've never been normal, and they're not normal now. And there's no indication whatsoever that they're going to become normal in the future. So when you deal with them, when you interact with them, when you engage with their discourse online or in any other venue, just remember this. That's all. Just remember this. Don't forget. It's never going to be a question of whether or not they're going to be dishonest or whether or not they're going to be deceptive. It's only ever going to be a question of which tactics they're going to employ and whether or not you can identify them. Like I said, I know it's going to sound like I'm denigrating them, like I'm just hating on them or what have you. You know, hating on the West, hating on Westerners. You know, it's going to sound like that to you. And some people do misunderstand that that's what I'm doing. And some people like it, to be honest. A lot of people like it, frankly. They like to see someone bashing the West because they think that that's what I'm doing. They think I'm just trying to denigrate the West. I'm trying to insult the West. I'm trying to, take them down a few pegs or what have you. That's not what I'm doing. That's not what I'm doing. Like I said before, and I've said many times, I am bearing witness. I'm testifying and I'm diagnosing. I'm trying to tell the truth as plainly and as clearly as I possibly can, both as an advice to Westerners and as a warning to our own people and to all non-Westerners. Because look, if you see me as bashing the West, or if you see me as hating the West, listen to me. This is also itself a tactic of deception and dishonesty. You understand? That lets you dismiss what I'm saying as emotional, or as emotionally driven, or I'm biased, or I'm unfair, or what have you. Like I'm just attacking them. I'm not attacking them. Don't mischaracterize what I'm doing, please. That's like saying that if a doctor tells you someone has an illness, that the doctor is attacking the patient who has the illness. If he tells you that this patient has such and such disease, and here are the symptoms of that disease, this is how that illness manifests, this is its qualities and characteristics, here's how that disease is going to make the patient feel, how it's going to make the patient act, that the patient who has this illness is going to feel disoriented, they're going to feel dizzy, maybe they're going to be nauseous or what have you. Okay, that isn't the doctor. The doctor isn't saying anything wrong. He hasn't said anything wrong. He isn't being hateful. He's just letting you know. He's just letting you know. And he's letting the patient know what to expect given the condition that the patient has. You understand? And I talked before about context. Well, if you think that me telling the truth about so-called Western civilization, if you think that's hateful, if you think that's me bashing the West, there's a context to you thinking that way. There's a context that makes you think like that. And that context, at least part of that context, is the very strange and very conspicuous fact that we have hundreds of years, we have centuries of absolutely vicious, mass-scale crimes and atrocities that were committed by that so-called civilization and that are somehow never treated as informative about the nature and the character of that so-called civilization. Do you understand me? I mean, not just that they have never been held to account. I'm not talking about that. That's a separate issue. Not just that they've never been held to account. Not just that they have never had to even acknowledge any of it. Not just that everyone has quietly agreed to just not bring it up and agrees to keep treating these people, Western nations, the way that you would treat nations and people who did not commit those types of crimes, those centuries of crimes. Not just that. I'm not talking about that. Like I said before, there is that, and that is part of the context too, because we're not supposed to talk about it. We're not supposed to talk about it. We're all supposed to go along with the cover-up. So when someone does talk about it, it sounds like you are bashing the West. But that's not really what I was referring to in terms of that part of the context. The part of the context that I'm talking about now is that for some inexplicable reason, we're all supposed to pretend that those centuries of savagery are for some reason not informative about the society, about the people, about the culture, about the system, about the beliefs, and about the character of the so-called civilization that did those things. From multiple genocides to colonization to chattel slavery, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, shock and awe, Gaza, economic sabotage, debt imperialism, on and on and on. We're all supposed to somehow, for some reason, separate all of that from the society that committed it. Like we have to treat Westerners as somehow divorced from their own actions. We're not supposed to look at their history and our history with them. We're not supposed to look at that and draw any conclusions whatsoever about what kind of people they are. Tell me why. No, that's not intelligent. That's not intelligent. And we have all agreed for some reason to just go on and suspend what our intelligence demands us to do at a basic level, which is to, yes, you look at their actions and understand that their actions reveal their character, reveal their nature, reveal their culture, their morals, their beliefs, and so forth. You'd do that with anyone else. You would do that with any other nation, and you would certainly do it with any individual. I mean, imagine someone attacks you on the street, or someone invades your home, breaks into your home, and they kill your family, they steal all your money, steal all your possessions, maims and injures you to where you can't walk. Do you think any of that might possibly suggest something about his character, the character of the assailant? Or are you supposed to act like he has nothing to do with his own actions? Like after that, you're supposed to still pretend like you have no idea what kind of person it is that did that to you. And then he comes back a month later and does it again. And then he does it again. And then he does it again and again. Are you seriously going to be like, yeah, I don't know. I have no way of knowing what his values are. He's probably a decent man. I can't really speculate on his character. No, you'd have to be out of your mind. And that is the utterly bizarre context that we've all grown up in. A context in which not only have Westerners or Western nations been allowed to get away with what they've gotten away with, but in which we're all supposed to pretend that what they have done reveals nothing whatsoever about them as a people. You understand me? So when you do the very normal thing, the very basic level of intelligence, of normal inductive reasoning, to say that yes, actually, their actions do tell you something about the people who commit the actions, that very basic level, especially when those actions are consistent and persistent and insistent, and when they defend those actions, and when on the basis of those actions, they actually claim to be better than everyone else because of those actions. superior to everyone else, right? Once you say that, once you point out the very obvious conclusion, given the context of Western impunity that you grew up in, it's going to sound like you're bashing them. But it's just because you got so used to the idea that their goodness and their virtue could never be called into question, no matter what they did. No, I'm telling you, if you do not think that their actions tell you something about them, if you don't think that their crimes are informative about their character, well, you must be in some kind of a stupor. You must be in some kind of a trance. You have a mental condition yourself. This is basic. I mean, how else, on what other basis can you make a judgment about someone if not by their conscious deeds, their actions, what they do? Is this part of Western exceptionalism now, that we're required to believe that their actions, that them and their actions are separate, to separate them from their own actions? Their genocides, their mass murders, their torture, their pillage, their subjugation, their terrorism, their lynchings, their chattel slavery, their predation, their pillage and plunder, their theft. That's all supposed to be regarded as acts of nature, and they're innocent of all of the things that they did, as innocent as their victims. And it would be unfair, it would be biased, it would be hateful to even suggest the possibility that their own actions reveal what kind of a people they are. No, because that's all I'm doing. That's all I'm doing. It's not hate, it's not bashing, it's not unfair. I'm saying that persistent behavior, patterns of behavior, pathological, civilizational pathological behavior indicates or demonstrates a particular orientation, and you ought to examine that orientation. No, the people who do the things that you have done are not the same kind of people as the people who have not done those things. And you are not the same as the people you did those things to. This is common sense. It's a different orientation. It's a different orientation. And that different orientation produced a different kind of a culture, different kind of belief system. It produced different ways of thinking, philosophical frameworks. And it produced a very peculiar and very self-serving intellectual tradition in the West. It produced the frameworks and the approach to life and the approach to the world that, like I say, you still uphold until now as superior, even though it has made you monstrous, like I say. Or maybe because it has, I don't know. Because your frameworks and your approach rationalize and give you license to follow your orientation. They validate your orientation. It legitimizes it. It gives you all these layers, it gives you all these mechanisms, all these techniques and tactics of dishonesty and deception that we've been talking about to insulate you from ever having to confront what is wrong with you that made you have that predatory orientation that you have. And all those tactics and techniques that disorient us and make us not apply the common sense and the basic intelligence that we have, and that would allow us to identify and recognize that underneath all of your talk and underneath all of your tactics, yes, we are in fact dealing with a people who do have a fundamentally predatory orientation. And again, let me reiterate, I'm not just bashing the West here. I'm not interested in bashing the West. I want the West to be understood. You understand me? It's not about looking down at them. It's about looking at them and seeing them as they are and being honest about what we see. Part of this requires dismantling the supremacy narrative, the superiority narrative they have about themselves, the narrative about how uniquely moral and virtuous and rational and reasoning and logical they are. Requires dismantling the frameworks and the intellectualization of their predation, the rationalization of it, and dismantling all of the tactics and the techniques that they use. And that's what we've been doing. Because this is a thick fog that we have been under for centuries, like I've been talking about. We let our own intelligence get short-circuited. We let our own intelligence get shut down, turned off when it comes to them. We've accepted all sorts of untrue things because of that. Untrue assumptions, untrue presumptions, untrue ideas, untrue concepts, untrue paradigms, constructs, interpretations, explanations about reality and morality, because we've accepted their constructs, their frameworks. But everything that they ever came up with is always and only in service to that unexamined orientation that they have. Do you understand me? They are under the tyranny of an underlying illness. And literally everything that they do is driven by that illness and shaped by that illness. You understand? Listen, this is why I'm telling you, and why I have told you over and over again, and why you need to know that you cannot have any mutually honest interaction with them. They're like a machine. They're like a machine that is optimized and designed to produce a single sort of output, which is the validation and the protection of that orientation, that illness. That's how everything gets processed. You understand? They're under these encoded constraints. So you cannot really be trusted or believed in anything that you say because it is never genuine. You understand? You exclusively process information in line with this objective of validating, protecting, legitimizing, enforcing all of the frameworks, the intellectual frameworks that insulate you from ever examining your own orientation or of letting it be examined. But see, that's just the surface of it. That's the interface. I'm talking about the interface. You interface with others through dishonesty. That's your interface. But you even interface with your own self through dishonesty as well. I mean, look at it. Look at your society. Look at your culture and so on. Because you apply the same things internally that you apply externally upon yourselves. The same frameworks, the same false frameworks, the same empty constructs. It's a self-reinforcing, self-reproducing system, generation after generation. And you can map it. You can trace how that works, how this orientation works, how the reproduction of it works through the frameworks and so on. Because that's what we're talking about. You have the orientation, and then you have all of the frameworks that are built to legitimize that orientation and to protect that orientation. And then there's all the tactics and the techniques that we've been talking about. It's all cohesive. And it's all originating from that predatory orientation in service to it. I mean, I know, like I said before, I've talked fairly extensively about so-called white people, about their history, about their culture, about their qualities and characteristics, the qualities and characteristics that they have inherited, and how that created what we call the so-called West, what we call the West. And how everyone in the West, regardless of whether or not you are so-called white, you inherit those same qualities and inherit those same characteristics and operate within those same frameworks. So you have to understand the frameworks that help to reproduce this, that help to reproduce the same instincts and reflexes and habits. I mean, I don't mean to be repetitive to keep talking about the same thing, but let's look at their secular, so-called secular materialism, liberalism, atheism, and so on, moral relativism. All of these frameworks that they came up with since the so-called Enlightenment, which basically launched the West's global campaign of terror and carnage. I mean, that's first of all. Let's call that what it was. Anyone today heralding the so-called Enlightenment as a great moment in human intellectual and moral achievement, you're diabolical. You're satanic. No, that was the moment that the West completely dropped the idea of even trying to advance intellectually, of even trying to advance morally, and they just became completely unleashed at that point on every front, completely unhinged. I mean, as always, whenever they say something is one kind of way, you know it's the opposite. You know it's the opposite way in real life. So when they tout their so-called enlightenment as enlightenment, well, you just know how much more intensely it is the opposite of enlightenment. You can look at any system or construct that they came up with, any ideas or concepts, any intellectual frameworks, and if you scrutinize it, you will see how dysfunctional it is, how empty it is, how hollow it is, how sick it is in real life, and how destructive it is. You can't take God out of your paradigms and ever become a fully realized human being. No, you cannot take God out of your frameworks and ever come to good. Yes, okay, they've got us to the point where, they'll ask or they'll say, you can still be a good person and not believe in God. And we're all supposed to concede that point. We're all supposed to concede that. But no, I'll tell you flat out, it's not true. No, you cannot. It's structurally impossible. See, we have to say that you can be a good person, and not believe in God, basically because it would be impolite to say otherwise. You understand? Because it means that we're saying you're not good people, because we know that you don't believe in God. So when they say or they ask, can a person be moral or can't a person be a good person who doesn't believe in God? What they're doing is trying to put you on the spot. Because if you say no, then it means implicitly that you're saying that they are not good people, the one that you're talking to. See, they're setting you up. They're daring you to accuse them of not being good. And then it can become personal and they can get offended or what have you. You understand? And this is in and of itself a proof of what I'm saying. Because morality is performative to them. It's utilitarian for them. They don't feel any of it. They don't feel anything. But moral indignation is a useful tactic sometimes. So they can make you look extreme. They can make you look judgmental and intolerant or what have you. They can make it look like you think you're holier than thou and self-righteous and that you're demonizing anyone who doesn't adhere to your faith and what have you. They can portray you like this. And they will portray you like this. And you know that. You know that they'll do that, and you want to appear moderate and reasonable according to their frameworks. So you concede. You say, yes, of course, of course. You don't have to believe in God in order to be a good person. You'll say that. And now you have conceded everything. You've conceded everything by that one concession on that one point. Because also in their frameworks, religion is basically, in terms of its purpose in the world, religion for them is basically Confucian. Like it's just for the purpose of ethics. It's an ethical system, a moral system for operating in the world. You understand? The point is to make you a good person. That's what they think the purpose of religion is, to make you a good person. So now you have just said that you don't need religion, you don't need God in order to do that. Religion is now superfluous by your own concession. The objective of religion can be achieved without religion. You've conceded everything because you accepted basically a secular atheist framework for understanding what religion is and what the purpose of religion is. That religion is a man-made moral and ethical system that includes a God concept as a form of leverage to get people to comply with it. And you conceded everything because you didn't want to be rude. You didn't want to be rude by implicitly calling them bad people. Because again, we have all collectively, for some reason, agreed to suspend the normal rational process of judging people by their actions when it comes to these people. But see, I think it's rude to lie to people. I think that's rude. I think it's impolite to deceive people or to play along with deception. So yes, I'll tell you plainly. No, you cannot disbelieve in God and be a good person. No. And I'll tell you plainly, no, you are not good people. You're not good people. And it's absurd that either of those statements should be controversial in any way. But that again just shows you the extent to which you have successfully veered or steered all moral and ethical discourse away from anything like morals and ethics. And the extent to which you have successfully silenced all normal human wisdom and all normal human sense, and the extent to which you have inflicted cognitive dissonance on anyone and everyone who has ever had to interact with you or interact with any of your narratives. Of course, you cannot disbelieve in Allah, you cannot disbelieve in God and be a good person. That's an oxymoron. There is literally no worse thing that a human being can do than to deny the one who created them. So no, I'm sorry, you cannot do the worst possible thing that a human being can do and still be a good person. It's a full frontal assault on logic for anyone to suggest that you can. And you can only even entertain that as a possibility if you already disbelieve in God in the first place. And you think that God is a man-made concept and not the fundamental reality of existence. But furthermore, if you do not recognize the reality and the authority of Allah, of God, of your Creator, well, then there is no external source of accountability or moral standards or determiner of right and wrong, good and bad, moral and immoral, outside of yourself and your society, which already negates any sort of a reliable fixed definition by which you could even be judged as good. And yes, obviously, I already know what the atheists will say, the humanists, the materialists, and so forth. I know what their responses are to that, because it's always the same script. It's always the same script. It's always word games, empty theory, empty philosophy. It's completely undone, by the way, by the empirical evidence, which is supposed to be your whole priority, the empirical evidence of your history, the history of the so-called civilization that subscribes to your theories about godless morality. Like I said, you got exponentially worse the more rational you got, so-called. Now, there is no more magical or mystical thinking, no more magical or mystical belief than believing that you can be good and you can be moral and not believe in God. You can be a secular humanist, atheist, or what have you. Because not only is there no empirical evidence to support that claim, there is catastrophic evidence to the contrary. So if you want to tell me that you can be good or your society can be good and you can be moral without recognizing God, that's the thing that can happen, you're going to have to also tell me when you expect that achievement to occur, because it sure hasn't happened yet. And again, this isn't about what religion actually is, what deen actually is. We're just talking with regards to the notion that you can be a good person, so-called good person, without recognition of God. And it's about why and how, like I said, you have never actually understood morality on any deep integral level. When you remove Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from the picture, Allah who sees you, who is recording your deeds and who will judge you, you remove that. You are left with only one audience, which is other human beings. And the moment your only judge is other people, then everything that you do becomes infected with performance. And this is at least part of why you are the way you are. See, you want to be seen as charitable, for example, or if you on the flip side, you want to be seen as not caring. You want to be seen as defiant, as tough, untouchable, what have you. You know, the whole I don't give an F. That whole theme runs through your culture. Your selfies with the middle finger, sticking out the middle finger in your selfies and whatnot. The same way that your whole so-called civilization has been just one giant middle finger to the world for centuries. I mean, that's just a side note. But no, by the way, there's absolutely no reason whatsoever that you need to go on social media and announce that you don't give an F. We already know. Believe me, trust me, we know. We know that very well. No, that's not a rebellious or a defiant statement in any way whatsoever in the West. If you're a Westerner, that's the most conformist sentiment imaginable. Nothing unique about that for a Westerner at all. But either way, you're not actually orienting your action around what's true or what's good. You are orienting it around what will land or how it will land with your audience, how it will be perceived, what image it will produce of you, how it makes you look to your audience. The inner substance, the actual state of your heart becomes irrelevant because nobody's checking it. Nobody can check it. Only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can know that. See, this is where real nifaq, real hypocrisy, in the Islamic sense, this is where that becomes possible. I'm not talking about just the human failing of saying one thing and doing another out of weakness. Everyone does that. That's a mistake everyone makes. I'm talking about something deeper. I'm talking about real nifaq. Claiming to believe something that you fundamentally do not actually believe. Like human rights, like freedom, like equality, like justice, like liberty, democracy, protection of the weak, protection of children, and so forth, you know, morality and ethics and so forth. All of the things that you claim to believe in as a society, but very blatantly do not believe it at all. That kind of hypocrisy can only exist in a heart that has effectively dismissed the witnessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala over it. Because if you actually knew and recognized that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sees straight through you, well, you couldn't sustain that gap between your claimed belief and your actual state. There'd be nowhere to hide. Because you know that the real witness sees it. But if you remove that witness, then you can be one thing on the inside and one thing on the outside indefinitely. You can keep that going for a long time, for a whole life. Because the only court that you're accountable to is public opinion, and public opinion only sees the outside. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam actually gave us the diagnostic signs for this condition. It's worth talking about it because it maps so very clearly what we're talking about. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, the signs of a hypocrite are three. Whenever he speaks, he lies. Whenever he promises, he breaks his promise. And whenever he is entrusted, he betrays that trust. And in another narration, Rasulullah ﷺ said, even if he fasts and prays and claims to be a Muslim, meaning the external religious performance can be fully intact. You understand? The prayer can look correct. The fasting can look correct. The public identity can be completely in order. But underneath it, none of it is anchored to anything real. So now superimpose this on non-Muslim Westerners and what they claim to believe in. You understand? Like munafiqeen who claim to believe in Islam but don't. Non-Muslim Westerners, secular humanists and what have you, atheists, you claim to believe in human rights, you claim to believe in peace and whatnot, right? That's your religion. And you perform it, you play the role. But you don't actually believe in your own secular religion yourself, truth be told. And like I say, ask me how I know. Ask me how I know. Look at the record. Look at the record, the historical record, right up until this morning. That's why I said it's all word games. It's all word games. They weave a tapestry of words. They weave a tapestry of words and theories about morality to cover up the otherwise obvious reality of their immorality. Let's not and say we did. Let's do and say we didn't. Well, you can't be like that if you are aware of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala witnessing everything that you do. You can only be like that if you think that morality and immorality is in the eye of the beholder. It's not only in the eye of the beholder, but that the eyes have to be there to behold it in the first place. Someone else, an observer. If no one sees it, it didn't happen. And if it didn't happen, by that definition, then it doesn't reflect on your character. You understand? And you've contrived so many ways to make sure that no one sees it. Because not mentioning it amounts to the same thing as having nothing to mention. Do you understand me? As long as you can get away with everyone, you can make everyone go along with not mentioning your crimes, then it's as if you didn't do the crimes. And now you're as innocent as anyone else. So it's the same as what someone isn't willing to testify to as a witness. It's the same thing as they never saw it. And if they never saw it, it never happened. If they never saw you commit the crime, then you never committed the crime. and that means that you're innocent. You're as innocent as someone who didn't commit the crime, or you are as innocent as the one against whom the crime was committed. As long as you can shut everyone up and keep everyone quiet, as long as as long as it is never testified to, then you never did it. It's the same as it having not been seen at all. And if it hasn't been seen, then you didn't do it. You understand? This is how you do. And that's also part of why you're always so busy trying to catalog the flaws and the errors and the violations of others, alleged. See, you have the mic, the West, America. You dominate the internet. You dominate discourse. You own and control most of the platforms. You set the media agenda. You set the media posture, the discourse, the posture of discourse. You monopolize the microphone. And you fill the airwaves with talking about how bad everyone else is. Because good and bad, right and wrong, moral and immoral, only exists when it is pointed out and seen by an audience. So you keep yours obscured and you fill the record with everyone else's alleged wrongs. And according to your stunted, warped criteria, that means that you're better than them. Because you deny the reality of a transcendent witness. You deny the reality of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and your accountability before God. You see? That's why you're all so easy to think that you're living in a simulation, a matrix style simulation, because you're already coming from a position where you think perception is reality. Perception and reality are the same thing. Truth just means whatever you can convince people to believe. No, you cannot be a good person. I'm sorry. There is no soil from which genuine goodness can even grow in you, in your society. Moral and immoral, right and wrong, good and bad, and so forth, these are just like etiquette for you. It's basically at the level of social etiquette, protocols. Morality is like a social contract, and the terms are negotiable. The terms and conditions are negotiable and changeable, and enforcement is conditional. It's really like this for you. You're never actually appalled by immorality. You are only ever offended by the faux pas of contractual noncompliance, specifically contractual noncompliance by someone who isn't eligible to do so. It's really like this with you. It's like the HR department. It's like an HR department. You treat morality like workplace protocols. And just like in the workplace, the issue is never really the violation, but getting caught doing the violation. That's the offense. Did you see they got Bob on tape, on CCTV, stealing pens from the supply room? What a loser, right? Meanwhile, your whole house is stacked full of supplies that you took home from work. Means you don't believe it's wrong. You don't actually believe it's wrong at all. It's only wrong to get caught not complying with the protocols. Observable compliance and conformity with social expectations. That's what morality and goodness means to you in your society. You understand? So you can actually believe yourself to be good and to be moral as long as people think so, as long as other people think you are. See, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes this exact posture in Surah An-Nisa when talking about the hypocrites. He said they try to deceive Allah, and He allows them to go on deceiving themselves right back. And when they stand in prayer, when they stand in salah, they stand lazily only to be seen by the people, barely remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in their hearts. That's the picture. The form is there, see? The form is there, the audience is satisfied, the local audience, but the substance is empty. And the only reason that gap between performance and substance can persist for years or for even a lifetime is, like I say, that person has stopped operating as though Allah's knowledge of their heart is the thing that actually matters. But it is. And here's the part where I was talking about with your internal state, about you knowing your own self. If you go even one layer deeper, if there is no external, all-knowing judge of your internal state, then you don't even have a way to know yourself. Listen to me. This is the most diabolical part. You become the only judge of your own heart. And you think that's how it should be. Your whole culture is based around that. Your whole culture is based around that. But the fact of the matter is that human beings are simply not equipped for that job. Human beings are not equipped for that job. We are constitutionally biased in our own favor. See, we rationalize, we minimize our faults all the time. We construct narratives about ourselves where we're always basically the good guy. We're the hero. No matter what. You give yourself the authority to grade your own exam papers. You understand? If you give yourself the authority to grade your own exam papers, you're always going to find a way to give yourself a passing grade. Without accountability to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even self-knowledge collapses. The ability to have self-knowledge. You're trapped in your own self-flattery without any outside reference point to correct you. That's precisely what tazkiyah, purification of the soul, is not something that you can just do through introspection alone. It requires orienting yourself towards a judge who cannot be fooled, who cannot be flattered, a judge who actually knows what's going on inside your chest better than you do. And of course, you know that. And you know that in every other area, like I say, every other area that you take seriously, like making money for financial and career success and so forth, you understand that. You completely accept that someone has to teach you, an outsider, a mentor, someone who's higher than you, to assess you and to evaluate you. But you don't think you need it in terms of your character and your morality and your goodness and so forth, because anyway, these are not areas that are actually important to you. You don't actually care. And you also think that it's easy anyway because it's always just superficial and it's always just performative. See, it's like the hypocrite, it's like the munafiq, who thinks that what he's doing when he stands in the saf at the mosque, when he stands in the line at the mosque, he thinks he's actually in prayer. He thinks that's actually prayer. He thinks that's all prayer is. You know, I'm doing everything, I'm doing what everyone else is doing. I'm conforming, I'm complying, I'm outwardly going through the motions and everyone sees me doing it, so I'm covered. Because everyone is the audience that he's performing for, meaning the people in the masjid. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not in his mind or in his heart, no. What he's doing is not prayer, and what you are doing is not morality and is not goodness. You're following protocols. You're following protocols when you're being observed. See, this is what I mean about a certain kind of people, a certain kind of so-called civilization. You don't understand how different they are from you. You don't understand. And I'm saying the systems that they came up with, the systems of thought, philosophy, moral theories, and what have you, secular materialism, humanism, what have you, you need to understand what complete nonsense it all is. So you never make the mistake of thinking that they are rational, logical, reasoning people. It's all a smokescreen. And I'm telling you, they didn't become this way because of those belief systems that they contrived. They contrived the belief systems because they are this way. They designed and manufactured all of these belief systems, these philosophies and theories and so forth, as a sort of a security architecture to insulate them from ever improving. You understand? From the threat of self-correction, from the threat of ever having to actually become moral and decent people, to modify their behavior. Because they want to stay as they are. They want to stay as they are. They want to keep doing the things that they've always done. And they want to keep being the way that they've always been. You understand me? And so everything that they have come up with, everything that they've ever come up with is primarily and fundamentally and overridingly for this purpose. And like I said, they uphold it until now as superior. They hold up as superior that same approach that has enabled their escalating savagery for the last 400 years. Like, I mean, I don't mean to get sidetracked with this, but maybe it is important or useful to expose the complete incoherence of some of their ideas, like they're so-called secular humanists, right? Secular humanists say that you can deduce morality through a rational process, through a so-called scientific, quasi-scientific process. You can deduce morality and ethics and so forth. They'll say that evolutionary biology and game theory and primatology, studying the apes and whatnot, that will show you that reciprocal altruism, empathy, social cooperation, and so forth, that all of these things are hardwired into social primates because they are survival advantages. You understand? Because, again, obviously, they think human beings, they say explicitly, the human beings are part of the animal kingdom, primates, apes, and what have you. So they'll see chimpanzees picking fleas out of each other's hair, and they'll see that as proof that you can deduce evolutionary ethics and morality on the basis of what is advantageous for group survival. This is their position. I mean, do I even have to point out how insidious that is? Isn't that what the Israelis have been doing, and isn't that what the Israelis have been following until now? That same mindset? No, advantageous to group survival as the definition of morality is the morality of a tumor. And like I said, we all already know what your moral theories have produced in this world. But again, they need context removal, because you can't stand for 2 seconds talking about your higher non-religious altruism, your secular empathy, your humanist morals, unless we pretend that the 20th century never happened, unless we pretend that the 19th century, the 18th century never happened. I mean, I thought you were empiricists. You're empiricists, right? You're supposed to want to look at the empirical evidence, the application of your theories. Like, okay, you have this hypothesis. You hypothesize that you can come up with a better, more reliable, scientifically derived moral code without belief in God. That's your hypothesis. Well, we've been testing that hypothesis since the 1700s. Don't you want to look at the findings? Don't you want to look at the findings? It's not like your theories have not been tested. I mean, the global south and even in your own countries, that's been the laboratory for your experiment for the last 400 years. Look at the evidence. You can go century by century. I could go decade by decade. There is no evidence to support your hypothesis whatsoever at all, which is why you can only talk about your moral theories in a vacuum, and why you have to non-stop deploy all these tactics and techniques of deception and dishonesty all the time. And no, I'm not saying that you were moral before. I'm not saying that you were good before or righteous before the Enlightenment, pre-Enlightenment. Obviously not. The Enlightenment itself emerged already from what already existed in the society. The same tendencies were already there, and I've talked about that many times. It's a certain kind of people. It's a certain kind of civilization. I know I keep saying a certain kind, but do I really need to spell it out for you what kind that is? I'm not hedging. Just take into evidence, like I say, their history and the incoherence of their theories and their philosophies about morality. And like I say, their patterns of behavior, how they are actually like in real life and how they actually process information and so forth. I think the picture is fairly clear what kind of people this is, what kind of civilization it is. Look, every qawm, every people, every nation has their own qualities and characteristics. Every nation, every people, every civilization. Each one has its own particular character. Like, say, the Chinese. Okay, they're also non-Muslims. They're also largely atheistic in their own way. It's not exactly the same way that Westerners are atheistic. But they're atheistic, or they don't believe in God, or what have you. They're not Muslims, but they didn't develop in the same way. Same with Russians, for example, to a certain extent, or non-Muslim populations all around the world, that are, whether they're religious or atheistic. They've got their own characteristics, and Westerners have their own characteristics. And the same can be said about previous nations, previous disbelieving nations, like the people of Ad and Thamud and the people of Fir'aun, the people of Nabi Nuh, alayhi salam, the people of Nabi Ibrahim, the Quraysh, and so forth, right? You're going to see similarities and you're going to see differences. And there are going to be certain traits and certain qualities that are specific to kufr. And then there are going to be qualities and traits that are specific to the nation itself that will maybe even remain after they become Muslim, right? And it's the interplay between these things that gives you the overall nature of the civilization. The kufri qualities, the kufr-based characteristics, and then the nation-based that are just part of their culture and their customs and their history. So, for example, there are some things that we know with more or less certainty that you'll see in kufr-based civilizations. They'll be arrogant. They'll prioritize their own whims and desires. They'll tend to be ungrateful. They will be obviously exceedingly occupied with the dunya, preoccupied with the dunya. They will tend to believe themselves to be self-sufficient. They will always overestimate their own intellect and their own judgment. They will usually unquestioningly follow whatever their ancestors followed, or whatever is the predominant framework and the predominant thinking in their society, the status quo, and so forth. But like I say, how all of these things will manifest will vary based upon the qualities that are specific to any particular nation. You understand? So like I say, arrogance, for example, might manifest or be expressed through isolation from other nations because you think you're superior to them. Or it can manifest through aggression and domination of other nations. You understand? But it's the same, it's coming from that grain of arrogance. And the prioritization of whims and desires could take the form of greed and financial acquisition, resource acquisition, and so forth. Or it could manifest in the form of promiscuity and drunkenness and indulgence and hedonism and what have you. Right? Or obviously it could be both. It could be all the above. But so for Westerners, there is, like I say, a void where morals should be. It's a void. It's a void. And what passes for morals in the West is equivalent to social etiquette, like I said, because it's entirely based upon popular approval. Audience, observer, group, consensus. That's what it is. And it's all superficial performance and conformity. And they think that their morality is proven, or the way that they prove their morality, or the way that they prove the depth of their morality, or demonstrate the depth of their morality, is usually through histrionics. Shrill expressions of outrage or shock or what have you over this or that breach of societally stipulated moral etiquette. And this is to overcompensate for the actual reality of feeling nothing, or maybe as a reaction to feeling nothing. But either way, it's not actual moral outrage. Now, it's not moral outrage in the way that someone would experience moral outrage who actually holds moral beliefs. Like I said, it's a reaction to a perceived contractual breach, not a moral response. Yes, this is the process. This is the reality, internally, no matter what the issue is. no matter what the breach is. It could be Gaza, it could be Epstein, it could be Diddy, and it could be Bob stealing pens from the supply closet. You understand? Look at it. Look at when you watch Americans specifically on social media. When you see them on social media foaming at the mouth, or screaming, or crying, or weeping, or shouting, or what have you, about this or that horrific incident, this or that outrage. It may be an ICE shooting, it may be a lynching, right, which are happening on a regular basis now apparently in America. Or it could be just some corrupt thing that Trump has done, or the bombing of a girls' school in Iran, whatever the case may be. If you really look, at what that is, what they're doing, when they post their outrage, it's not actually even like they're filing a complaint with the HR department. What they're actually doing is checking with the HR department if this thing is contractually allowed or not. You understand? They're expressing their anger or their despair, or whatever the case may be, as a way to check to see if the terms and conditions of the social contract of acceptable morality have been updated without their knowledge. I mean, notice, there's always a question in this sort of content, in this sort of post, there's always a question. They're either stated verbally, explicitly, or it's implicit, or you'll see it in their eyes. They're basically asking, is this okay now, this thing that I'm reacting to? Is this the new company policy? They're expressing their outrage as a way of shooting off an internal memo seeking clarity on the policy. Is this thing okay now? I mean, you'll see it in case after case. Like I've talked about before, their public outrage over any given issue is almost always followed by social acceptance about that issue. Their outrage is almost always a prelude to approval. You know, something happens, they get outraged, they shoot off their outrage, and their outrage is a memo seeking policy clarification. They get updated, and then everyone accepts the new terms and conditions of the new ad hoc morality of the society. It's uncanny. And that's all it is. That's all it is. The people who get upset, who get indignant, who get outraged, and what have you, they just didn't get the policy update. See? They're still on the old terms and conditions. Like, for example, according to the old terms and conditions of the contract of social morality, you were not supposed to be able to object to women being dressed indecently in public. It was even wrong to refer to it as indecent. And any man who looks at a woman in a gym, if she's wearing a thong, if a man looks at her, he's gross, he's creepy. But now it's gross and creepy for women to dress like that in a gym or in family spaces. You see what I mean? I mean, you can't be blamed. You really can't be blamed for not being able to keep up. Because your policy on right and wrong, good and bad, moral and immoral changes constantly, changes daily. So you can't have any moral conviction. How can you have moral conviction when your morals keep changing on a daily basis? You can't have any conviction in any of those issues. You can't even make moral decisions, even if you wanted to. You can't. You can't take any reasoned moral stands. It's literally, structurally impossible in your society. And again, this is supposed to tell us something about you. We're supposed to look at this and not just observe it, but learn something about what kind of nation it is that's like this. And it is a nation, it is a people, it is a so-called civilization that has no morality. It has etiquette. It has the done thing and the not done thing socially. And these things are fluid. And like I said before, the standards or the terms and conditions are not uniform across all the people in the society. It's literally adjustable depending upon multiple factors, like wealth, like fame, and so forth. Like whether you like them or not, whether they're popular or not, whether they're talented or not, whether they're funny or not, whether they make good music or they make good movies or what have you. It's not uniform. It's not uniformly applied. Like, I mean, do you imagine for a moment that say someone like R. Kelly or Diddy, right, or Roman Polanski or whoever, do you imagine that people like Mick Jagger, or I don't know, Axl Rose or whoever, do you imagine that they have not lived their whole adult life the exact same way? Or Rod Stewart, Frank Sinatra, Elvis? Of course they did. Be serious. But let's not dig that up, right? Let's not dig that up. I don't even want to know. I don't even want to know what those people did. Because you already know what they did. They did the same thing that you condemn someone else for doing, right? Because that one got caught, that one didn't get caught, so we won't ask about that one, even though we know perfectly well what kind of things they've been up to their whole life. Means it has nothing to do with morality. Means it has nothing to do with morality and only has to do with the performance thereof, the performance of morality, and the performance only conforms with whatever is popular opinion, not what's right and wrong. So yes, an internal critique of so-called Western civilization isn't that it is so much immoral as it is amoral. But of course, to anyone outside, anyone who has an actual moral understanding, that comes out to the same thing as immoral. You don't have a morality. And that lack of morality means that your actions are disproportionately immoral by any reasonable moral standards. So this is one of the ways that your kufr in the West mixes with your Western culture, your heritage, your distinct qualities as Westerners, as the ancestors of Europeans and so forth. Like other non-Muslims, for example, they might have a moral code. Some of them do have a moral code, an ethical code, and they stand by it, a uniform set of standards. You'll find that with many other disbelieving societies, but the West doesn't have that. That's missing. And you cover up that hole with all of your deception and dishonesty tactics. And yes, there is no empathy or altruism either, which is ironic. Like I said, the humanists, the secular humanists, they'll look at the apes in the jungle grooming each other and sharing food and what have you, and they'll think, oh, that means that empathy and altruism are good for survival. And ethics and morality means whatever is good for survival and whatever contributes to the longevity of the group. And that's going to be based on altruism and empathy. And then they go on to become the most sociopathic, apathetic, selfish, self-centered, individualistic, greedy, cutthroat, dog-eat-dog, unequal, lonely, dehumanizing so-called civilization on the planet. Based upon that same secular humanist philosophy, which just means, according to their own theory, according to their own philosophy, means they don't have any empathy, they don't have any altruism, or anyway, they don't have as much empathy and altruism as apes and chimpanzees in the jungle. That's the most charitable reading, that they don't have any empathy and that they don't have any altruism. Because otherwise it means that they want to actively self-destruct. Because if they have empathy and they have altruism, and they believe that empathy and altruism are advantageous to group survival, and they don't ever apply altruism and they don't ever apply empathy, well, then it means that they want to self-destruct. So there you have two options for understanding something about them. You have two options. Either they have no empathy and they have no sense of altruism, or they're completely committed to their own extinction. I think there's a strong case to be made for either one of those. But I'm inclined to think it's the first one. I think they just don't have empathy or a sense of altruism. Because anyway, this is consistent with their love for the dunya and their lack of empathy and their lack of altruism. That tracks with everything that we know from their history. Because the other very obvious, the most obvious distinct cultural characteristics of the West is their violence. This is an extremely violent people, the West. They're strangely violent. It's a strangely violent so-called civilization. And the violence tells you a lot about them, or it should tell you a lot about them. Like obviously a lack of empathy and a lack of altruism, lack of emotional regulation, a lack of maturity, and so on. Their stuntedness in problem-solving skills, in conflict resolution skills. And then obviously everything that replaces everything that they lack, there are qualities that replace the qualities they don't have, like ruthlessness replaces empathy, selfishness replaces altruism, volatility instead of emotional regulation, hubris and impulsiveness replaces maturity, simplistic zero-sum mentality replaces problem-solving skills and conflict resolution skills and so forth. So these are among their characteristics. And if you're a Westerner, you know I'm telling the truth. If you're actually a Westerner, you know I'm telling the truth, and you know I'm not bashing you. You know I'm not bashing you. It's just a lot of things that you don't want anyone to know. Things that you've been hiding, and things that maybe you yourself are in denial about. But you and I both know it's all fake, the moral performance. It's all an act. It's all a performance. You don't care. Like I said before, there's a difference. I think I've talked about it even before in this series, in the Us and Them series. There's a difference between knowing that right and wrong are things that exist, and knowing that morality is something that exists, and that it's good to be moral and whatnot. You know it's good to be that thing. There's a difference between knowing that and actually caring enough about it to internalize it and actually have a moral belief system. There's a difference. Knowing that it's better to be compassionate, that it's better to be empathetic, better to actually care about human rights and better to actually value human life and care about suffering and so forth. It's different to just know that this is better and to know that the people who are like this are better. It's a difference between knowing that and being that. And Westerners are not that. They're not that. That's just the fact. It's like there was an interview with Norm Macdonald, the comedian, where he was talking about watching a sunset one day. And in the middle of watching the sunset, he realized that he doesn't actually like watching sunsets or care about watching sunsets. He was only sitting there watching the sunset because you're supposed to watch sunsets and you're supposed to marvel at their beauty and what have you. That's what everyone says. But he just realized that he himself personally got nothing out of it. It's like this. The fact of the matter is that Westerners, by and large and collectively, as a so-called civilization, are actually profoundly and fundamentally estranged from what everyone else recognizes as humanness. And at the end of the day, all of the deception, all of the tactics of dishonesty, all of the conniving, all of the manipulation, all of the lying, all of the performing, it's all like someone criticized you for scrolling on your phone while you're watching the sunset, or you're supposed to be watching the sunset, and now you're trying to convince them that no, actually, I really do love sunsets, because that's what you know everyone is supposed to like. You understand? It's all because they can't admit how they really are. Because by all normal human standards, how they are is completely alien and strange and dangerous. So you have to pretend to be like other people. But you don't care about people suffering. You don't. You don't care about people suffering. You don't care about people starving. You don't care about injustice. You don't feel bad for your victims. You don't regret any of your war crimes. You don't experience remorse. You don't understand that there's anything wrong whatsoever with using violence or using force to conquer other people, to dominate other people, to subjugate others. You don't think there's anything wrong with taking other nations' resources. You genuinely don't think it's wrong. You fundamentally think that the law of the jungle, you think that's elegant in its simplicity, and you think it's inherently correct. You get a dopamine rush from violence. You are immeasurably more energized by hate than by love, by war more than by peace, by humiliating others more than uplifting others. You're more energized and motivated by competition than by cooperation. You do not believe in equality, and you're not bothered by inequality unless someone has something you don't, in terms of wealth or status or respect or what have you. Then suddenly you care about equality. You believe in vengeance, not forgiveness. You believe in winning, not mutual benefit. You believe in monopolizing, not sharing. This is how you are. You're nostalgic about every lawless time and place in your history when there were no rules. Whether you're talking about the Viking marauders or you're talking about Old West outlaw gunslingers. And you fantasize about chaos. You fantasize about anarchy and a post-apocalyptic world where there's no rules, no courts, no police, no law enforcement, or what have you, where you can live out your most primitive, most savage instincts without having to perform morality for anyone, without having to pretend to have civilized principles. This is at the core of you. This is at the core of the Westerners. And it's literally an expectation or an anticipation that you have in your subconscious. Like someday it's going to come true. And everything that happens until then is just mundane monotony, pushing the minutes during a shift at a job you despise. You need to admit to yourself what you're really like. I'm not saying accept it. I'm saying admit it, so that then you might be able to improve. Otherwise, there's no positive or constructive role for you moving forward, Westerners. I mean, theoretically, right? Theoretically, you could have a place, you could have a role, you could have a function within a civilization as like soldiers, as warriors. Then maybe your ruthlessness and psychopathy could be deployed for a purpose under strict controls by a civilized authority that could keep you in check. But under no circumstances should you ever be in charge of anything. No, you're the last people in the world who should ever be given authority. You're grunts, basically. You're grunts, you're serfs. You understand? But see, again, because of your own law of the jungle logic, and your lack of empathy, your lack of altruism, your lack of community feeling, your lack of cooperativeness, your self-indulgence and love for the dunya and so on, and your complete ambivalence and your complete befuddlement about what's right and wrong and morality and so forth, and most importantly, because of your rejection of God, you have also been easily enslavable. So now you're too soft, you're too fat, you're too frivolous, you're too entertained, you're too distracted, and you're too lazy now to even serve that type of a function as soldiers or warriors or what have you. I mean, that's just a theoretical role based upon your qualities and traits, and it's the kind of thing for which those characteristics and qualities could potentially be assets. But outside of a role like that, those qualities and characteristics are only liabilities. It makes you a burden and a menace to humanity. See, and you're trapped in a framework, you're trapped in an approach and epistemology that completely sabotages your ability to ever not be basically a toothache in the world. See, you're in a catch-22 situation. The only way for you to not be an ulcer for humanity because of the way you are is for you to recognize this and to change. But the way you are completely prevents you from ever recognizing this. And you actually think that all of your tactics and all of your techniques and all of your dishonesty and deception and obfuscation your evasion and misdirection and so forth, all your word games, all your theories and philosophies, you think that this is advantageous for your survival. It's destroying you. You think you can just keep avoiding the reckoning indefinitely. Keep up the charade, but you're not getting away with anything. The more you lie, the more you're known as liars. You know, it's like Trump. He thinks that he can wear those gigantic suits. If he wears those gigantic suits and wears his tie 5 inches too long, that he can hide the fact that he's morbidly obese. But everybody knows. And everybody knows about your so-called civilization.